My journey to America was a dream pieced together from borrowed books and late-night radio shows back home in Ghana. I imagined a land of endless opportunity, a place where your mind mattered more than your origins. Getting into an Ivy League university felt like the final scene of a movie. I was going to be a scholar, to learn from the best, and to bring that knowledge back to my people. I pictured myself in grand lecture halls, debating big ideas, and making friends from all over the world. The acceptance letter was not just a piece of paper, it was a golden ticket, a promise that my life was about to change in the most wonderful way. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that education could build bridges between worlds. The first day of my political science seminar was nothing like the movie I had in my head. I walked into a room filled with students who looked like they were born into this life. They wore expensive clothes and spoke with an easy confidence I couldn't yet find. I chose a seat in the back, hoping to just observe. But the professor, a man with a stern face and spectacles perched on his nose, started the class by asking us to introduce ourselves. When it was my turn, I spoke about my home, my village, and my passion for understanding global politics. The room went quiet. I saw a few students exchange smirks. It was a subtle shift, a small change in the air, but I felt it deep in my bones. It was the feeling of being an outsider. The professor then made a comment that stung more than any open insult could. "It's always interesting," he said, looking in my general direction, "to see how far some people will travel for a free ride." A few students snickered. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. He didn't know me. He didn't know about the nights I spent studying, the jobs I worked to save for the application fees, or the other life I lived. A life of service that had brought me to this very institution. I felt a hot wave of anger and shame wash over me. In that moment, I wasn't a scholar or a dreamer. I was just a stereotype, an African student they could easily label and dismiss. The dream was quickly becoming a harsh lesson in prejudice. That first day was long and lonely. The other students avoided my gaze, whispering among themselves during the break. I tried to join a conversation, but the circle just seemed to close up as I approached. It was a strange kind of invisible wall, one built from assumptions and quiet judgments. I left the campus that day with a heavy heart, the grand old buildings feeling less like temples of knowledge and more like exclusive clubs where I didn't have the right membership card. The excitement I had felt just that morning had evaporated, replaced by a cold, nagging doubt. Was this really the place I had dreamed of for so long? Or had I traveled thousands of miles just to be reminded of how different I was? That night, I couldn't sleep. The professor's words and the students' smirks played on a loop in my mind. I thought about quitting the class, maybe even the university. It felt like a battle I was not equipped to fight. I had come here to use my mind, not to defend my existence. But then, another thought pushed its way through the frustration. I had another identity, one they knew nothing about. An identity I had earned through discipline, sweat, and a commitment to a cause bigger than myself. I was not just a student from Africa. I was also a specialist in the United States Army, a path that had ultimately funded my education here. It was a part of my story they had completely missed. The decision came to me in the quiet hours before dawn. I would not fight their ignorance with angry words or retreat in defeat. I would show them who I was, without saying a thing. The next morning, I did not reach for my usual jeans and t-shirt. Instead, I went to my closet and pulled out my army service uniform. The crisp green fabric, the polished brass buttons, the colorful ribbons on my chest. Each element told a story. It was a story of discipline, of sacrifice, and of service to the very country they all called home. As I put it on, piece by piece, I wasn't trying to be intimidating. I was simply choosing to present my whole self, not just the part they thought they understood. Walking to class that day felt different. The uniform was like a suit of armor, not against physical threats, but against the silent daggers of prejudice. It was strange, because this uniform represented a collective, a team. Yet I had never felt more like an individual. I was taking control of my own narrative. I was no longer just the quiet African kid in the back of the room. I was a man with a complex past and a present they couldn't possibly imagine. I walked with my head held a little higher, my shoulders a little straighter. I was nervous, yes, but underneath the nerves was a sense of resolve. Today, They would see me. They would really see me. The idea was not to seek their approval. It was about demanding respect, not for me personally, but for the truth. People build stories about you in their heads based on a single glance. They see an accent, a skin color, or a foreign name, and they think they have the whole book figured out. I realized that sometimes you have to show them a different cover, one so unexpected that it forces them to stop and reconsider everything they thought they knew. My uniform was not an act of aggression. It was an act of clarification. It was a silent statement that said, "You do not know me, and you have no right to judge what you do not know." When I walked into the classroom, the chatter stopped. It was so sudden, it felt like someone had flipped a switch. Every single eye in that room was on me, on the uniform. The students who had smirked the day before now stared with wide, unblinking eyes. Their mouths were slightly open, as if they had forgotten how to close them. There was no whispering, no side glances, just a thick, heavy silence filled with shock and confusion. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads as they tried to connect the man in the decorated military uniform with the charity case they had judged just 24 hours earlier. I walked to the same seat I had sat in the day before, the silence following me like a shadow. The professor was the most startled of all. He was writing on the board when I entered, and he turned around, annoyed by the sudden quiet. When he saw me, his chalk froze mid-air. His face went through a series of emotions in a matter of seconds. First surprise, then confusion, then a dawning realization that looked incredibly uncomfortable. He looked down at my polished boots, up at the flag on my sleeve, and finally at my face. The look of smug superiority from yesterday was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like embarrassment. He cleared his throat, but no words came out. The power dynamic in the room had completely flipped, and I hadn't even said a word. "Specialist," the professor finally managed to say, his voice much softer than the day before. I didn't know." He then looked at the rest of the class, who were still staring at me. Let's all take a moment to thank this young man for his service." Suddenly, a scattered and awkward round of applause broke out. A few students muttered, "Thank you for your service." The girl who had laughed the loudest yesterday now gave me a small, sheepish smile. It was a surreal moment. The very people who had looked down on me were now thanking me, not for my intellect or my character, but for a uniform. It was a different kind of judgment, but it still felt hollow. The rest of the class was a blur of forced kindness. The professor kept calling on me, asking for my unique perspective on international conflicts. Students who had ignored me a day ago now leaned over to ask me questions about my ribbons. "What's that one for?" one asked, pointing to my chest. "Wow, that's so cool," another said. They were friendly, almost reverent, but their friendliness felt just as fake as their contempt had. They weren't seeing me any more clearly now than they had before. They had simply swapped one stereotype, the poor African student, for another, the heroic American soldier. Both versions were incomplete, and both missed the actual person sitting in the chair. I felt a strange mix of vindication and disappointment. On one hand, I had proven them wrong. I had shattered their prejudiced assumptions and made them confront their own biases. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing the shock on their faces, in knowing that they would think twice before judging someone so quickly again. I had taken back my power and refused to be a victim of their ignorance. That part of me felt strong, even proud. I had stood up for myself in a quiet but powerful way, using their own symbols of honor and patriotism to expose their hypocrisy. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. But on the other hand, I felt a deep sense of sadness. Why did it take a uniform for them to see me as a person worthy of respect? Was my humanity not enough? Was my journey from a small village in Ghana, my love for learning, my very presence in that room not worthy of basic decency? Their sudden change of heart wasn't born out of genuine empathy or a desire to know me better. It was a reaction to a symbol. They weren't thanking me. They were thanking the uniform. They were saluting a costume, not the character of the man wearing it. This realization left a bitter taste in my mouth, tainting the small victory I had felt. This experience taught me a powerful lesson about appearances. People are quick to put you in a box. The first day, my box was labeled African Charity Case. The second day, it was American Hero. Neither box was big enough to hold my actual story. We are all more complex than the labels society gives us. We are a collection of stories, experiences, and identities that cannot be understood with a single glance. True respect doesn't come from discovering someone is one of us or fits into a category we admire. True respect is what you owe to every single person before you know anything about them at all. It's the starting point, not a prize to be earned. In the end, I felt more alone than ever. They smiled at me now, but their smiles felt empty. I had their respect, but I didn't have their understanding. I wondered if they would ever see past the uniform, past my accent, and just see me, a student who dreamed, a soldier who served, a man from two different worlds just trying to find his place in one. The classroom became a reminder that we often judge the book by its cover, and even when we are forced to read a page, we still might miss the entire story. And I promised myself I would never be that kind of reader.